I'd like to ask you a question in regard what is to me one of the most significant aspects of this exhibit, which is the collaboration. Can we talk a little bit about collaboration? And of course, collaboration means a lot of different things, but here is two artists, two physicians, working together.
We first met at the Chicago Art Fair several years ago, and we both had an interest in contemporary art. I'm a collector, and I learned in short order that Rick is a sculptor. He learned I'm a poet. I happened to also see some of his work at a great collection in Chicago at the same time. And from that time, he became an important reader of my poetry, and I think I became an important observer of his art. So I think that's where it began.
I think that's a good representation of how it started, but the collaboration itself didn't begin with a project. As Mark alluded to, the collaboration really began with common interest in sharing of ideas. The sense of moving towards a specific project really didn't come until much later in our friendship as it evolved and our kind of growing respect for each other's work.
We began to think about the possibility of doing a project together, and there's an obvious overlap. We're both very active physicians. I practice oncology. Rick practices pulmonary medicine and critical care medicine. And we've both taken care of all too many very sick people in our careers. And this dialogue began, and one of the things that I think made it unusual is that there is a host of shows that have, over the years, related art and poetry. There's been a real synergy historically between poets, especially, and contemporary artists. But here we were interested in a true collaboration, something where the work together would result in a project that was different and in some ways perhaps more important than either one might stand on its own.
There was a temptation as this project began to reiterate in some visual way what was taking place in the poetry. And by mutual agreement, I began to make objects and installed areas that attempted to make kind of a parallel universe which was in concert with the poetry, not simply a reiteration of the words or a direct concept whereby the words were lost because of an overabundance of attempt to emulate.
Interesting enough, the poem, the bridge already was there. Therefore, that poem you already have written was a known poem, and you decide to work on that. Therefore, as you say, you are not interpreting the poem. You are letting the poem be part of the exhibit. Therefore, the poem become a visual element, and the visual work, the sculptures become also part of the poetry. Is that what you're implying?
Yes. The poetry, the body of work, 26 poems entitled The Bridge, had already been written. And as I began to read Mark's work, I realized that there were tremendous interrelationships between what he was experiencing and what I was experiencing, and that this was a tremendously interesting group of poems from which I felt I could pull out images that would be in some way additive, informative, in conjunction with what he had written. But the selection of the poetry, I think, was really crucial. Mark, maybe you could help on this.
Well, we started with a base, and the base is a body of these poems in the voice of a hospitalized patient. And it starts with the patient speaking and telling us that she or he has been in the hospital now 2 weeks. And as the sequence of poems develop, we learn some of the difficulties of being hospitalized, that the patient has problems communicating with the system, etc. So this baseline existed, but where this became a true collaboration is that how the poems were used in the exhibit, how they were selected, what parts, whether orally or visually, became a collaboration with Rick and myself and you. And this became a three-way collaboration to use the poetry with objects, with visuals, with oral art, so that there was an experiential aspect for somebody coming into a museum. So as a body of poetry, it stands alone as written text, individual poems that have mostly been published. But here in the context of a museum exhibit, it had to have a new life. And this new life meant how one makes things with it and how one displays it. So the three of us have worked on this almost 2 years, as you well know. And we've all had a hand pushing at each other in terms of how the words would be used and how the objects would be used, and whether there was true synergy in it.
Well, one of the exciting things for us at the galleries is we have done exhibits. I have curated exhibit of poetry before, and as you allude before, tend to be just poetry as an art form or poetry as a form, actually custom made for something. And one of the things that was exciting about this project is that the poetry, as I said before, is art, and the art, is part of the poetry. You don't have, in all instances, all the poems just on the wall. They are here on the gallery, and they are very, very important. Without the poem, the poetry, the exhibit, it won't have the shape or won't have formulated like it was. But at the same time, not only from the point of view of the installation of the artist, but the point of view of the museological, the museographic aspect of the exhibition, that gives a total different tone, that gives a different kind of direction,
Well, I don't know of any exhibit quite like this. It's so typical that a poet may write a poem about a specific painting. There's lots of that. Or an artist might do a piece that resonates with a particular poem. Here, we've taken the two and we've created something new.
A lot of times artists will make work that is not particularly designed for easy interpretation. They do the work without a lot of interest in how the observer sees it. I think all artists are guilty of that at some different times and things they make. In this particular exhibition, I wanted very much to use objects or to construct objects that could be connected to the words that we had all chosen to use. I didn't want this to be too mysterious from a visual standpoint. I wanted people to understand why the things have been made and what reference point they had to the words that we had all selected and carefully edited for usage.
But we couldn't get away from the mystery. The mystery is pretty much in the concept of the exhibition, because we are dealing with a theme that usually galleries, we don't say, well, we are doing, an exhibit about illness or an exhibit about a specific thing. Therefore, that by itself already gives a different kind of as I say before, a tone, give a different kind of manufacturing, to the whole project.
I think all three of us agreed from the beginning that an important aspect of the mystery is what's left to the imagination. There's a lot of material here, and some of it is more direct than others. But in the poems themselves, and in Rick's work, and in the way the installation has been created, the interstices between the words and between the objects are as important. For me, there's always been this important difference between how a poem looks on the page, and you write it to look a certain way on the page, then what happens when you read it. Now we have really a different hurdle, and that hurdle is, what is the experiential part of this, somebody coming through? So we've worked very hard not to be overly heavy-handed and let people bring themselves in large part to this exhibit.
The allegorical aspects of this, I think, are very important. You've told us that some of the visitors to this exhibition have been particularly touched or moved in some way. And yet, if you look at the specifics of the words and the objects themselves, there's nothing very explicit about them. And when viewers are in some way connecting to this work, it is because of what they are bringing to the exhibition, as much as what we've given them.
No, definitely. We already have experienced that. And a lot of people, they are looking at the whole thing, as a work of art. It's a reality. There is a sub-theme down there. The poems tell you something very specific. There are certain hints in the exhibit that already, even we didn't want to look exactly like a hospital. It's a hospital room in the exhibit. There are certain things that allude to certain specific things. But that is where also the human compassion and the human creativity, it comes to play. They are also part of this collaboration. It's not only the three of us. The viewer is also collaborating in this exhibit. Absolutely. Because they are getting out. Number one, they're getting out with some kind of suspense. They don't know what happened to that person that you are talking about, and you are alluding on the exhibition.
The patient or patients who are represented by this exhibit is universal. And it's impossible. It's like you're reading a book and you develop a mental picture of a character. And if it's well written, you have a vibrant picture of that character. Here, there's no great assistance as to who it might be. Mm-hmm. It might be a woman, it might be a man. And this lack of assistance, if it's compelling, brings our own self into the work.
One of the things that we've discussed over the past few months is what in fact happens to this person.
That is what I am referring to.
And we probably have a disagreement, which is kind of strange since he wrote the work.
Right.
Why don't you say what you think happens?
Well, when the last poem in the series, which becomes the title of the exhibit, is The Bridge. And I remember very vividly writing that poem, my usual vacation spot without the cell phone going off. And I'd come to the end of it and I showed it to my wife, and she was crying. And she said, "Did she die? Did she die?" I said, "I don't know, but I think she's finished talking to me." I think that, to me, I thought she died.
You wrote it, but I'm not so certain that she's gone.
Well,
I've read the work. I probably have read the work as much as you've read the work, and you wrote the work.
Well, last night we did a production of this in New York, and the audience was convinced she was alive. Last week we did a stage performance. They mostly thought she died. So for me, it's really amazing.
Well, the object that is in use in this show the bridge object, the long 30-foot piece, if you had to physically cross this object, you might be able to do it. It'd be very precarious and very difficult, and you'd really have to want to do it, which was the intent of that piece. But I sense that some people might be able to get across it.
Well, there's a strong thread throughout the work that one might assume that the patient has had cancer, and one might assume that the patient has undergone a lot of travail, difficult tests, difficult treatment, and certainly in the next to last room in this exhibit, which you couldn't have done better. The poem, the patient is speaking about the disintegration that she feels in her body, that she's no longer whole. And the poem is on the floor, and there's a sense of erasure as you're crossing through it. And then this bright last room with this beautiful object, the bridge. And there's an enormous sense of hope in this recitation about her family and her father and her history. So maybe she's had a complete remission.
I mean, I just think that he's changing his mind. Good.
No, not really.
But I think we all cross bridges in a lifetime. Some are not so difficult, some are exceedingly difficult. All of us have a certain degree of erasure that we have just with the difficulty of living a life. We all have this experience. And so I don't think we have to decide. Obviously we can't. Yeah. What happens to this person?
To me, it's almost irrelevant.
It is.
You know what I mean? Because it is a celebration of life, regardless how you put it. And I think it's the dignity and the beauty of, you know, things that surround us. And from our standpoint, our exhibits are an exercise in visual literacy. You know what I mean? We do this kind of work here in order to actually leave, you know, the gallery thinking about something else or wanting to come back. Therefore, to me, that is irrelevant. The beauty of here is the collaboration, this part of how, you know, everybody, including, you know, the subject of the exhibit, if you want to put it that way, the patient, you know, I mean, everybody is a participant on the exhibit. That is the way that I see it.
The journey, which part of the title then becomes this journey through illness, the journey that we become a part of. The patient has come into a hospital, and there's this sense that she's unwittingly entered a place of new language, a place of unfamiliarity. And we're taking part of that trip with that patient. And in this new location of language, there's these barriers, this insensitivity, these obstacles, difficult tests, machines that don't work, treatment that may or may not work. And as we continue on this journey, I think we're learning part of that language and insight as well. And at the end, no matter what happens, there's a celebration as well. And the celebration is coming to terms, whatever that is, coming to terms.